My name is Marcus Holden. I'm 52 years old, a retired captain in the U.S. Army, where I served for over 2.5 decades in strategic cyber operations. I came from a long line of soldiers. My grandfather fought in Korea, my father in Vietnam. Serving wasn't just something we did, it was who we were. For most of my career, I worked in the shadows, building the digital infrastructure that kept our operations secure. I wasn't the guy kicking down doors or pinning medals on a uniform. I was the guy making sure when they did, there weren't drones overhead or traps waiting on the other side. I didn't need a spotlight. I just needed to know it worked. And it always did. Until one day, it didn't matter anymore. There was no parade, no retirement dinner, no folded flag handed to my wife, just a silent memo, couched in vague language about restructuring and redundancy. It didn't say I was finished, but it didn't leave room for anything else either. The message was clear: we don't need you now. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was how quickly they moved on. People I trained stopped replying to my emails. My access was revoked within an hour. I logged off one night and woke up the next morning a civilian. Just like that. Years of work erased behind firewalls I helped build. I walked through the halls of the base one last time, but nobody looked up. No one said goodbye. Some didn't even make eye contact. Like if they acknowledged me, they might be next. I understood it, didn't blame them, but it cut deep. You don't expect gratitude, but you don't expect to become a ghost either. I kept thinking maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone upstairs would realize what had happened and call me back in. I checked my phone constantly for days. Nothing. Just silence. And then it hit me. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. I'd been removed, not as an accident, not even as punishment, just as part of a plan that no longer included me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know where I belonged. He walked in like he owned the place. Lieutenant Colton Kyle Merrick, 35 max, fresh haircut, clean boots, and the kind of self-assured smirk you only earn from TED Talks and LinkedIn endorsements. He introduced himself as the future of operations. I didn't realize I was already part of the past. From day one, he made it clear he was there to shake things up. Modernize, streamline, optimize. Those were his favorite words. He didn't ask how the systems worked. He told us how they should work, based on some diagram he saw in a PowerPoint deck from a Defense Innovation Summit. To him, the legacy protocols I built weren't battle-tested frameworks. They were inefficiencies, bureaucratic leftovers from a slower era. He called them clunky. I called them secure. He said they were too human. I said that was the point. We had one meeting early on where I tried to walk him through the skeleton of the old system, showed him how each trigger had a fallback, how every alert was cross-verified manually. He nodded a lot, took notes on a tablet, then, 3 days later, scrapped the whole thing for a flashy AI model from a startup with no deployment history. He started calling me sir in a way that didn't sound like respect, more like a polite way of saying relic. When I brought up a potential vulnerability in the new model, he smiled and said we needed to embrace calculated risk. I'd spent my entire career eliminating risk, but apparently that made me rigid, unadaptable, old guard. The meetings got shorter. My name disappeared from calendar invites. People who used to stop by my office for advice started avoiding eye contact. There was always a reason: reorg, efficiency review, shift in strategic direction. But the result was the same. My seat was still warm, but my voice was gone. It was strange, being erased in real time. I'd walk past the server racks I helped design, the control nodes I'd patched during a cyber attack in '09, and watch young officers fiddle with settings they didn't understand. They were confident, loud, eager, and completely blind to the fact that the only reason the system hadn't failed yet was because the old bones were still holding up. Then came the email. Subject line: Command realignment notification. It wasn't even personalized. Just a block of text about leadership fluidity and operational transitions. Effective immediately, I was reassigned to a remote advisory role with no staff, no access, and no clear function. I didn't even pack up my things right away. Just sat there, staring at the screen, rereading that line about strategic pivoting like it was going to change meaning if I blinked enough. There was no conversation, no warning, just a quiet exit disguised as an opportunity. I shook Kyle's hand on the way out. He thanked me for my service, said he admired the foundation I'd laid. Then he turned back to his team like the bricklayer had finally left. And now it was time to paint the walls. Driving home, I kept thinking about that foundation. About the silent hours, the sleepless nights, the buried code that no one would ever see but everyone relied on. They didn't tear it down, they just stopped looking at it, and that hurt more than if they had destroyed it outright. Because when you build something with care, with purpose, you don't expect applause, but you don't expect to be forgotten either. It started with a simple ping. My old access credentials were supposed to be deactivated, but curiosity made me check. A small part of me hoped the door was locked, that they'd at least done that much right. It wasn't. The system let me in without hesitation, like an old dog still remembering its master's scent. Everything looked familiar. Not much had changed on the surface. Same dashboards, same routing logic, same triggers blinking in the corners of the screen. Then I saw it. Protocol Delta, buried where I left it, untouched, still active. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle in. It wasn't just a forgotten file, it was a live gatekeeper, still tied to a digital signature that only I had. Not my title, not my clearance level. My name, hard-coded, unalterable. Without that signature, access to several high-tier operations would eventually fail. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. They hadn't seen it. I was sure of that now. Merrick and his crew had rebooted the shell but never read the bones. They treated the system like a machine that could be restarted, rebranded, renamed, but they never understood it was alive in a different way. Its trust was earned, not reassigned. My signature was the final key. Without it, the command structure would drift into compliance errors. Redundant systems would flag inconsistencies, and the entire logic path would begin to question the legitimacy of the current access chain. Quietly, silently, until it froze. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched the screen. Years of embedded failsafes, all still listening for a voice they thought no longer mattered. They'd kept the frame but gutted the essence, and they didn't even know it. Control was never about rank. That was the first rule I learned in cyber warfare. It wasn't about who shouted the loudest. It was about who understood the layers, the signals underneath the surface noise. And right now, I was the only one who knew where those wires ran. They thought I'd retired, faded, irrelevant. But the system didn't forget me. And when the time came, it wouldn't obey them. It would wait for me, just like it was designed to. The first error showed up at 0400 hours. A minor delay on an auto-authentication script. Nothing urgent, just enough to make someone squint. I was already awake, sipping my coffee in the dark. I didn't move, didn't reach for a phone, just waited. By 0600, the operations board at the Pentagon lit up in yellow. Protocol Delta failed to validate. The fallback sequence activated, but without the digital signature it looped. Again and again. The system thought someone had tampered with the root logic, so it did what it was programmed to do. It shut the gates. Satellite queues froze. Drone pathways locked. Communication packets backed up in silent purgatory. Somewhere in a secure room, someone cursed at a screen. They didn't know yet what had failed, only that it had, and that it was spreading. I watched the reports trickle into my private mirror server. Not hacked, not breached, just withheld. Like a soldier obeying its last true command. The command I'd written, line by line, years ago, when I still believed systems should be smarter than people. At 0807, the first internal Pentagon memo tagged it as a Tier 1 anomaly. They thought it was a cyber attack. Firewalls were triple-checked. Redundancies cross-validated. But there was nothing to fix. Because nothing was broken. It was simply missing a name. By 0830, Joint Command issued a halt order on 3 exercises. 1 in Europe, 2 domestic. They couldn't risk launching blind. The live feedback loop had gone dark, and the only person who knew the map of the entire feedback structure was already cleaning out his garage in Virginia. I didn't respond to the texts, not to the emails, not to the encrypted ping from a private DoD address marked Priority 1. I just let it run. Quiet, controlled, like chess. Let them overextend. Let them panic. Then let them remember who built the board. By 0900, the system officially flagged a condition black. 1 sentence buried in the log. Signature authorization required. Capt. M. Holden. They hadn't noticed that clause in years. Thought it was ceremonial, legacy code. But the machine remembered. That was the first time in 2 decades I'd seen the Department of Defense actually blink. Not from an enemy, not from a breach, but from silence. The kind that comes when a system stops listening and starts remembering who it was built to obey. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just waited. They didn't send a request. They sent a black SUV, parked outside my driveway like a quiet warning. The driver never spoke, just nodded, opened the door, and waited. I didn't ask where we were going. I already knew. The ride back to the base felt slower than usual. Maybe it was just the weight in the air. Maybe it was the silence. I could see the tension in the driver's shoulders, like even he understood what this was. Not a return, a reckoning. They brought me through a side gate. No formal entrance, no salute. Just a long hallway, bare walls, and security cameras that followed me like eyes. At the end was the room. Same kind they always use when things go wrong. No windows. A table, 2 chairs. And across from me, Kyle Merrick. He didn't stand when I entered. Didn't speak. Just looked at me like a man who'd finally realized he wasn't holding the leash. He gestured toward the chair and I took it. Calm, silent. I didn't offer a greeting. He didn't deserve one. He opened with a speech. Something about national security, mission continuity, importance of unity. Words he probably copied from a PowerPoint slide. His voice was flatter than I remembered. No swagger this time, just tension. Then came the ask. The system, he admitted, had flagged a mandatory verification, a protocol that couldn't be bypassed or rewritten. Pentagon needed access. Defense contracts were frozen, exercises stalled, and the only thing standing between them and forward motion was a name. Mine. I didn't interrupt, didn't smirk, just listened, then reached into my coat pocket and placed a folded slip of paper on the table. 2 words written in block letters, Protocol Delta. He stared at it like it was a weapon, because it was. Not made of metal or circuits, but of control. He picked it up slowly, read it twice, then looked at me like he was trying to decide whether to beg or argue. I gave him neither option. I leaned back, steady, let the silence stretch. He asked if I'd be willing to authorize access temporarily, just until they could restructure. I didn't respond. His voice cracked on the second ask. I still didn't respond. Finally, he tried one last angle. Said this wasn't personal, that it was just policy. I raised an eyebrow, then told him softly that policies don't write systems. People do. And some of us wrote them well enough that they remember who matters. He didn't like that. I saw the flash of anger in his eyes, but he couldn't say anything. Because I was the only name that mattered now. Not his badge. Not his clearance. Mine. He slid over a formal contract. Special advisor role. Civilian status. Full operational access. 6-month term. Renewable. I scanned it, said nothing, then reached into my inner pocket, pulled out a pen, and placed it gently beside the paper. No rush. He asked what it would take. I told him the system wasn't broken. It just needed to hear the right voice again. Not loud, just known. He sat back, defeated. Said he never saw this coming. I told him that's because he never bothered to look beneath the surface. Control isn't what people see, it's what they trust. And they trusted me. I signed the paper, slowly, deliberately, then stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the door. Just before I left, I looked over my shoulder, told him next time, read the architecture notes before you start tearing down walls. Then I walked out, calm, steady, no applause, no cheers, just the sound of my boots on the tile. And behind me, a room full of silence. The kind that only follows when someone realizes they just handed the keys back to the architect. I didn't slam any doors on my way out. I didn't pull plugs or crash servers or lock anyone out. I just stopped. Stopped patching, stopped monitoring, stopped doing the 1,000 invisible things that kept the system upright. It wasn't sabotage, it was surrender. At first, they didn't notice. Reports still came in. Dashboards still loaded. But then small things started to slip. A data sync delay here, a misrouted approval chain there. Nothing dramatic, just enough for the gears to grind a little slower. By week 2, contract reviews started bouncing. Not denied, just stuck. Trapped in loops they didn't understand. They thought it was a software glitch. They called in consultants, combed through permissions, rechecked firewalls. But the system wasn't broken. It was waiting. See, the architecture wasn't just code. It was rhythm. It expected a certain touch, a pattern, a caretaker. And when I stepped back, it didn't fall apart. It just held its breath. Like a machine built on trust, confused when the hands it knew weren't there anymore. They kept sending updates, internal memos, emergency sync protocols, but nothing changed. Because the system didn't care about titles. It cared about history. And mine ran deep in its bones. Pentagon started asking questions. Why were contract flags not resolving? Why was the compliance tracker missing root validation? The answers were in the logs, but nobody knew how to read them. I did, but I wasn't there anymore. People thought I walked away in silence. Truth is, I walked away with a whisper, not of revenge, of resignation. Because you can't force a system to trust someone it doesn't recognize, and you can't fake history. By the end of the quarter, the cracks were visible from the outside. Delayed deployments, overdue authorizations. One high-priority project collapsed when the wrong node fired a false alert and nobody knew how to suppress it. That node had my name on it, not out of vanity, out of responsibility. I didn't cheer. Didn't say told you so. I just sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, watching it unfold like a house tilting under its own weight. I had offered to stay, quietly, no glory, just to keep the beams in place. They said I wasn't needed, so I believed them. This isn't about legacy. It's about respect. About knowing that systems don't stay alive because they exist. They stay alive because someone wakes up every day and chooses to keep them that way. They didn't lose me because I was irreplaceable. They lost me because they never bothered to understand what I actually did. Now, the system is showing them, not in flames, just in stillness. That's the part they never saw. Maintenance isn't loud. Control isn't flashy. It's quiet, steady, a presence. And when that presence is gone, everything slows until it stops. I didn't burn the system. I just let go. The office was smaller. No view, no seal on the wall. Just 4 desks, 1 humming server rack, and a team that actually read the documentation. They didn't care that I used to brief generals. They only cared that the systems I built worked and kept working. Rexford Defense didn't need a figurehead. They needed foundation. From day one, they asked the right questions. Not flashy ones, real ones. The kind that told me they weren't building something to impress. They were building something to last. There were no speeches when I came in. No framed welcome, no catered lunch. Just a login, an NDA, and access to their LiveOps framework. And in that quiet, I got to work. No noise, no politics, just function. Clean, reliable function. Back at my old unit, the opposite was unfolding. Meetings turned desperate. Language turned circular. The same buzzwords that once drowned my input were now choking their command briefings. Resilience, agility, optimization, but no one knew how to fix what was broken, because they never knew how it worked. Lieutenant Colonel Merrick was reassigned. Quietly, he called it a rotation. Everyone else called it damage control. A few of my old colleagues sent messages I never replied to. Not out of spite, just clarity. That chapter had already written its own ending. Contractors came and went. Some tried to patch the systems. Others proposed rebuilding them from scratch. But every solution hit the same wall. You can't rebuild a house without understanding the blueprint. And the blueprint wasn't in a binder. It was in the choices, the layers, the silent dependencies they never cared to learn. Then came the meeting. Federal procurement, final announcement. Conference room full, no cameras, just presence. Everyone in the industry had a rep there, some hoping for a miracle, others already hearing the rumors. When the projector clicked on, no speech followed. Just a single slide, contract partner awarded. Rexford Defense Systems. Below that, project lead, Marcus Holden. No applause, just silence. The kind that speaks louder than any statement. No one asked how. They knew. And they understood that the system didn't just remember who built it. It remembered why. Back at Rexford, I didn't stop to celebrate. I reviewed logs, updated protocols, and trained a younger engineer to shadow every move I made. Not to create a dependency. To create continuity. That's what I'd wished someone had done for me. Legacy isn't just about building something big. It's about building something that survives you. And that starts with respect. Not for titles, for structure, for work done right. They tried to replace blueprints with buzzwords, and the house collapsed. Not in fire, in silence. What I learned is this: you don't need the loudest voice to lead, you need the clearest one. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just let the system speak.